Testing. Testing. Good morning. We're just testing the live stream just to make sure that everyone online can also hear us. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. I am Meredith Jordan. I get the pleasure of working with Dr. Chenevere and Mel each and every day. I lead our diverse learners team. So all things special education. And of course, Dr. Chenevere is on our team. And I know today y'all are going to get to see a little bit about those things are not synonymous. L does not equal student with disability. But we'll talk a little bit about today where there is some overlap and how we're identifying. I know that's on the agenda. But I wanted to welcome you guys back. We're thrilled to have you here back at the department for another round of your L Institute. Really, as dedicated leaders, we have a vital mission here in our state to our English learners to make sure they are properly supported, getting the highest quality teaching and learning. And I'm so excited. I know I was here with you guys previously at an institute and got to kind of collaborate with some of you on that learning. And I'm really excited about the work that I see in our state, the dedication that we see to these students. And I think about the work that you all do really built on language acquisition, but so much more than that. You're giving kids their confidence, right? You're empowering them to be and to achieve everything that they dream of, right? And so it's so much more than that. And anytime that I'm in front of you guys, I always want to tell you thank you for the work that you do. We're thrilled to have you here. I did want to, and I asked Dr. Chenevere to give me a few minutes this morning because what we also want to do is to address head on some of the questions you may have, some of the uneasiness that you or your parents may have when we talk about immigration and some of the things going on in our country. And our team is working with superintendents on this as well. So we've had some communication with system leaders within your school systems as well on this and sharing communication, sharing tips with them. But what we have done is advise school systems to work with your legal counsel, make sure that you have systems protocols in place, that we're communicating those to our staff, our front office staff, to our parents, right? Protocols and having defined protocols will help you ease your fears, your staff fears, and your parents' fears, right? And when I talk about established protocols, I'm talking about protocols for protecting student privacy, right? FERPA, how we allow visitors into our building, having defined protocols for that. Those are the things that help us navigate some of that uneasiness, and even more importantly, helping to communicate to our families, because what we also know is we need these students in our buildings. We're here to support, we're here to educate, we need and we want them, right? And they have a right to be in our buildings. And so one of the things that will also be helpful in terms of parent communication and easing any worry about parents are those same protocols that we have in place, but just communicating that to families. Here are our responsibilities to protect your child's identity, your child's privacy, any data that we collect on your child, right? Here are our visitor protocols in our buildings. And so making sure that we are Also, just communicating with families, making sure they feel comfortable, because the last thing we want is for them to be hesitant to bring them to us, right? And to bring them to school. And so keep those things in mind. So I wanted to address some of that today up front, also to let you all know that we're having these conversations with system leaders. You all may or may not have direct contact with your school system legal counsel, but that's a key piece of this as well, and being prepared, and knowing how we will react as a school system. And that's your superintendent's role. That's your school system leadership role, is to make sure that there is a plan for that and that that's communicated. So wanted to just kind of share a little bit about that, the communication that we have with system leaders going. And just to leave you with a few final things, as you continue this important role, know that we see you, we value you. We're happy that you are here. We also hope to see you all at Teacher Leaders Summit. I don't know if Dr. Chenevert is going to show or preview or talk about any of that at any point today. I know y'all have a packed schedule, but I will tell you that she has planned some amazing sessions. I mean, we could probably call this the Little English Learners Teacher Leader Summit. So we have a lot of things planned to support this work and to support our educators at Teacher Leader Summit. So we want to see you there. Please come out. Please share with other educators, your teachers, your individuals supporting these students, and encourage them to go to some of these sessions. Leverage professional learning growth plans, right? And point your teachers to some of these sessions to help them grow in their profession, and build their capacity to support these students. So we hope to see you there. We look forward to spending the day with you today. Excited to see where you're going in our state. I have a lot of faith, no pressure, about where we're going and the improvements that we're seeing with our English learners. And with that said, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Chenevert to get you back on your regularly scheduled agenda. Thank you guys so much, and I look forward to being with you guys today. No. So there's no way to excuse, right? Um, there's no accountability code to say, I'm sorry. That's right. Yeah. Let me talk to our leadership team, but at the end of the day, we have participation federal requirements. So it's not only going to impact you all, it will impact us as a state and our participation rates on statewide assessments and accountability. But there is no accountability code that says my parents are fearful to send their kids to school. So I think what we should be doing, and not you all alone, but bring your concerns to your leadership team and say, hey, this is our problem. This is our challenge right now. What can we do? What communications can we get out there to our parents, to our families? What connections can we make to those parents that are fearful? How can we reinstill that safety and tell them these are the things that we have in place, and do as much as we can to try to ensure them, hey, school is a safe place. This is why we have these protocols in place. Um, and we need your child. We don't want them missing out, right? But it is tough. Yeah. Yeah. Let me check with our accountability team. Let me check with our leadership team to see. I am certain there won't be an additional accountability code added. But kind of using the ones that are there would be the only option, what would fit. But again, and I know you are, try to do as much as you can, as much connection with those parents, to get those students, make them feel safe, and tell them about all the responsibilities we have. Like I said, to protect your child, to protect their identity, and we have all those visitor protocols in place and FERPA in place, to help support some of that. I'll take one more and then we got to get on schedule. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Oh, yeah. Gotcha. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In case something happens to them. Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. Yes. So your school system is working on some virtual options or thinking about it? No. Yeah. They're requesting. Gotcha. 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 Well, yeah. Right. Right. We saw how virtual worked for, yeah. 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 Well, let me get with our leadership team, our executive team, see if there's any more updates, anything else that we could offer or provide to you all as resources or supports for this. But I know that you guys have some of the most challenging jobs, certainly right now. And it's really sensitive, right? And I just really appreciate you guys going to work every day, doing your best, trying to ensure families, trying to get them to school, and doing everything that you can. We certainly appreciate you guys. All right.
Thank you so much, Miss Jordan. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to see you for session 3 of the English Learner Institute. 3 down, 1 more to go. You guys have shown up every single time, and our friends that are online. So I'm so excited to see you all again. We have a lot of great information for you today. As Ms. Jordan stated, we do have a lot of English learner sessions for a teacher leader. So when registration becomes available, I would highly suggest that either you come or you send any of your L staff. I know we're working very hard to make sure that you do have sessions that benefit your teachers and your students in your school system. So I can assure you that she was giving you some factual information. So I do want to thank her for coming this morning to give you all a little bit of information and some guidance in regard to what's going on. But we do have some other members, other colleagues that support at the state level. So if you all could just wave at me so everyone can see you in the back. I know we have some of my colleagues that are here. Thank you all for coming. So we do have a number of great sessions for you today, and I want to turn it over to Dr. David Holbrook. So we are going to kick it off with monitoring students who have exited L programs and evaluating the effectiveness of L programs.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with you all again. I'm going to try to see if I can adjust where this goes so that it's not blocking the screen too much. All right, let me make sure this is working. Yep. All right, so we are going to be covering a number of topics. I am David Holbrook. I'm a former state director. I've done some consulting work with the U.S. Department of Education. Not a state director here in Louisiana. I was up in Wyoming. I am executive director of the National Association of English Learner Program Administrators, or NELPA. If anyone's familiar with that or going to the conference that NELPA hosts in a couple of weeks, that's great. I'm also Director of State Partnerships with Elevation Education. So I have a number of different roles. I've been working with NAILPA for quite a few years, and I've been working with English learners for 25 years or so, so it's been a while. You can probably tell by my gray hair and beard, I'm definitely a lot more white than I used to be in the hair area. Anyway, so thank you very much. Appreciate being here. We're going to talk about monitoring Ls and former Ls first, as mentioned. Evaluating effectiveness of L programs. We'll take a short break, and then we'll finish talking about evaluating students for special education and providing those services along with L services. So there's a lot involved with that. It's probably I think there's just as many slides in that section as there is in the first two. So that's why we're going to take a break after the first two. But first, we're going to talk about monitoring Ls and former Ls. And if you've been here before and you've heard me speak, you know I don't mind questions while I'm presenting. So if you do have questions, I'll try to answer them. If I can't, I might defer to folks with LDOE, or just if I'm going to cover it later, I'll let you know that as well. But first, this particular portion of the presentation is pulled from that January 7th, 2015 Dear Colleague letter, which is really a guidance a two-page letter with a 40-page guidance document attached to it. And we're going to be talking about monitoring and exiting L students from L programs, in particular L services. And we're going to be looking at some of the information in the English Learner Toolkit that's on the Office of English Language Acquisition's website. All right. So when we're talking about monitoring or tracking, what's the difference between that? I think of like a baby monitor, you know, where you're sitting there and you're just watching. It's not really an active thing. It's more of a passive thing. Where when we're talking about monitoring, it's much more of an active thing where you're watching what's doing and reacting to it rather than just, you know, hey, let's take a look. So monitoring it's looking at the progress of things and reacting to that. It's when you look at a dictionary definition, it's much more of on the active side of things when you're thinking about it. So I prefer to use tracking, but under previous laws, and there are some places that still talk about English learners that have exited L programs as being in a monitor status. And so that's part of the reason why I prefer to use tracking, because of to avoid some of the confusion there. But, you know, in No Child Left Behind, you used to require monitoring for 2 years, and they changed that to reporting for 4 years. So there's been some changes. So just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to what we're talking about. When we're looking at monitoring students, we're not talking about a programmatic monitoring like a compliance type thing. It's more along the lines of watching how students are doing, how they're progressing, and then addressing any shortfalls that we see and strengthening those areas that are doing well. All right. All right, so the purpose of that, I've kind of been walking through it to make sure that students are making appropriate progress. It includes English learners in L programs and those that have opted out of L programs. Just because parents might opt their students out of L programs doesn't mean you don't have the responsibilities to help them attain English proficiency and acquire content knowledge anymore. You still have that responsibility. It's now pulled out of your district identified program, and it becomes a responsibility of your classroom teachers, that type of thing. So tracking how those students are doing is just as important as tracking the students in your L program, because we want to see all of our students make progress and be successful. All right. In addition, there's some Title I kind of parallels in that the accountability indicator under Title I now it's not under Title III, it's under Title I for progress in achieving English language proficiency. So it's also in, you know, we have our Title III programs that are for English learners, but Title I has significant responsibilities as well, including accountability. Under No Child Left Behind, it was under Title III, but under ESSA, accountability for English learners, their progress towards English proficiency and their academic achievement is under Title I. Okay, so when it comes to that, thinking about the accountability under Title I, the accountability indicator is progress. And so how do you tell what your progress is unless you're watching and monitoring and making sure that your students are performing well? Okay, so tracking your English learners and their progress, not only academic progress, but language proficiency is also a requirement under ESSA. So like I said, any questions, please let me know. But I'm going to keep going as long as I don't see anybody raising hands, and we'll try to get through all this information. All right. So when you think about there's two different things going on. If you remember from my previous presentations, I've emphasized the civil rights requirements are for a successful program, it has to help English learners attain English proficiency and access that academic content. So there's two sides of that. And so when you look at the guidance document and the OLL toolkit, there's information about both tracking or monitoring English language proficiency and academic achievement. It's in both. In the guidance, it separates it out where they specifically address language proficiency and then academic achievement. But the OLL toolkit, I'm sorry, I think, yeah, doesn't separate it out, but they just address all of it together. And so I kind of like the way that the guidance did it, where it addresses it separately. So in this presentation, I'm going to look at English language proficiency and academic achievement, tracking and monitoring that separately. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the content side of things. So on the small side, the minimum side, we have to annually measure academic performance in valid and reliable ways. And that's usually through your content assessments. It can include tests in other languages if academic content instruction is provided in a language other than English. But, you know, that's probably less common. And I think we only have math here in a language other than English. But tracking academic progress needs to include things like setting benchmarks that allow districts to measure how your English learners progress over time. So those benchmarks, of course, are set, and you then look at their progress over time. So from an evaluation perspective, I'm sure you're probably all familiar with this. It involves this over time issue. So longitudinal data. How many of you have heard longitudinal before? Okay, so this is not an unfamiliar word. You know what we're talking about. So, and it involves tracking and comparing your English learners with former English learners and those who were never English learners. And I'll probably mention more than one time that there's not an expectation that your English learners perform perfectly. They have to perform comparably to your former English learners and never English learners. So we have never English learners who aren't passing assessments, and so there's no reason to expect that all English learners have to pass certain assessments in order to be considered as a group to be making progress. So if an LEA or a district determines that an L is not making appropriate, progress, you have to provide some kind of additional support. You all know this, but these are the things that civil rights is requiring. And those additional supports have to deal with accessing or acquiring grade level content knowledge. And that's an important piece that we see in a lot of different places when we're talking about academic achievement, that you should provide grade level support or grade level content to your English learners. It can be an issue if you if you don't provide that. And I think I covered that a little bit later. But the L toolkit goes on to talk about multi-tiered systems of support. And there was a time when there was a lot of focus on trying to see how English learners fit into that. That's a system that's typically used under special education. But a system like that could be helpful, especially when you're looking at the different levels of proficiency for English learners and the types of services that they might need. Any questions? Great. So, okay. Thanks. All right. Attainment of English language proficiency. I was concerned about that. It's hard to see what's going on sometimes with this screen here, so I'll move this for now for a minute. Most of my slides don't have this much text, but so apologize for that. When it comes to tracking English proficiency, we have to track progress based on the standards that are available. Now, you all have some English language proficiency standards, and so you have those, assessments as well, and those are a couple of tools that we can use when we're looking at tracking that progress. But a state's English language proficiency standards that are required under ESSA, they have to be aligned to the content standards. So there's some connection between tracking language proficiency and content. One form of, if you're familiar with formative assessments, that's another way that you can track. You kind of, when it comes to language proficiency, you set that, what they talked about, that benchmark, and then you can measure the progress that they make based on that benchmark over time during the school year. So that's a kind of a best practice and a good idea. But the emphasis in this area also is that it has to be reflect all four of the domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So that's another piece as well. All right. Whenever I click out of the PowerPoint, it also puts things off. Let's see if this is working now. Yes, there we go. Okay, so you have the Louisiana English Language Proficiency Test, so the ELPT, and that's a really nice tool to be able to measure progress over time from one year to the next. It doesn't help you during the school year necessarily. It provides you something, a nice tool to see, okay, where's everybody at now? So having that benchmark of tracking progress during the school year, some type of formative assessment is really nice to have. But on an annual basis, you can track the progress of your English learners on that ELPT. So that's a nice piece. It's also part of the ESSA accountability because the measures of progress in English language proficiency are required to be based on an English language proficiency assessment. In Louisiana, it not only includes the ELPT, but some of the LEAP assessments as well, which is nice to be able to look at both language proficiency and content at the same time. Of course, assessments have to be valid and reliable and aligned to the state's ELP standards as well. So those are some ESSA requirements, but by tracking your ELS performance on those ELP assessments, it can help you look at the progress, look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of your program so that you can address those weaknesses when needed. All right. So measures of progress and attainments. And I mentioned this as part of the Title I accountability. It requires states to develop projected timelines. Are you familiar with, I forget what it's called, thank you. I appreciate that. So those are something that you all have developed and available to you on the LDOE website. There's different documents and things that you can read about all of that. But regulations under ESSA require, this is something that's required under ESSA, those trajectories, and determining the progress, has to be based on at least an EOP assessment. You can have additional things, and you all do have the academic assessments included there. And so there were regulations that make it clear as well that you have to not only have long-term goals, but interim measures of progress towards English language proficiency. So that's part of ESSA as well. So you need to, I'm not sure where all that information is, but I'm sure it's on the LDE website in terms of what's required for you all when it comes to those trajectories. All right. So you can take other things into account when you're looking at measures of progress. And the state does take the LEAP assessments into account in ELA, math, and social studies. So we did talk about that a little bit. It is allowable to provide an English language proficiency assessment in fewer than 4 domains for English learners with disabilities who are unable to participate in all 4 domains. We've talked about this before. If you have this kind of a situation, I recommend that you talk to folks at the state, and there's an email address there that you can use to contact them to try to figure out how to make this happen and make sure that this is done appropriately. All right, exiting from L status. So according to the guidance document and the L toolkit, to exit an L, they have to demonstrate proficiency minimally on an English language proficiency assessment. You can have the EOPT. You can have other measures, but you have to have an EOP assessment. And it has to be valid and reliable in all 4 domains, et cetera. Again, Louisiana uses scores from the EOPT to measure L students' attainment of English language proficiency. The trajectories include the other assessments, but the actual proficiency, I believe, is just on the EOPT. Okay. The All-L Toolkit emphasizes some things related to exiting too soon or too late. If you exit a child too soon, they say you're effectively denying services that the students, are eligible to receive. And if you exit too late, you're potentially denying them opportunities to access the standard instructional program offered to never else, some parts of that. And they're saying this can impede the academic growth. So you want to make sure that when a student is ready to exit, they're exited, and if they're not exited too soon. I think we've talked about exiting students before, and if you exit too soon, it can be a compliance issue as well. All right. So I added some additional information in this section related to from the guidance document. So the EOPT, which is the EOP assessment, has to meaningfully measure student proficiency in each of the language domains. And overall proficiency must be a valid measure as well of student progress and proficiency. The proficient score has to be set at a level, and this is important to note, that enables students to effectively participate in grade level content. So that's the piece I've talked about before, and I'm going to talk about it again, this grade level content, being able to access that, because students need to be able to participate meaningfully in the classroom once they've exited English learner status. And if they haven't had access to grade level content, that they're more likely to be unsuccessful in the content classroom. Okay. And again, it doesn't mean that the student has to score proficient. They just, the student, the group of students as a whole has to perform comparably to those in the general education program. All right, so let's talk about former L's. You guys are really quiet. I'm just not comfortable with that. All right. So as discussed earlier, there are some legal requirements in Title III related to reporting L's. Academic progress, for the mandatory 4 years. If you're familiar with Title III, Under No Child Left Behind, it was monitoring for 2 years. Under ESSA, it's reporting for 4 years. Um, it's, there are some connections with Title I. When it comes to the accountability subgroup for content performance, you can include English learners in the L subgroup for up to 4 years. In Louisiana, it's 2 years right now. But it is allowable to include English learners for up to 4 years. And so you've got that 4-year reporting requirement in Title III and including English learners in the subgroup for up to 4 years under ESSA. Again, Louisiana only includes Ls in the L subgroup for academic accountability measures for 2 years. All right. I included this information and I pulled it pretty much out of the guidance document. And this is basically what it talks about when it comes to the purpose of monitoring, is that after students this is former English learners, after they've exited the L program, they have to ensure that students haven't been prematurely exited, that their academic deficits, if they incurred any, are being remedied. There are some programs that pull students out, especially in low proficiency, like newcomer programs where maybe they're not getting the full academic program. There are requirements that if that's the case, that you remedy any academic deficits if you run a program like that. And they have to make sure when it comes to former English learners' academic performance that they're able to meaningfully participate in the classroom at the same level as their never L peers. And I don't know if I do a lot of reading of news and follow research and things like that. And there's some really encouraging news out there. I don't know if anybody saw the study out of the school districts in Chicago, where they looked at former English learners' performance. And if you saw the article or read the research, what it showed were former English learners had higher grade point averages, had performed better academically, and had stronger college going rates. And there is research out there related to English learners. Sorry about this. That having the facility in 2 languages actually helps cognitive development. And so that research that showed that information about the college going rates and the academic performance, GPAs, things like that, were on the average higher for students who were former English learners than never English learners, I think is significant enough to be able to show us that how important it is that we work with this group so that they can become proficient and access grade level content, because they tend to perform just as well or better than our never English learners, which to me is huge when you think about it. There's studies related to dual language programs where you have both monolingual English speakers and others enter into programs where they become bilingual. And those students, you see the academic performance in the early grades lower than your never English learners. But as they get older and they get towards graduation, they outperform their never L peers. So that 2 languages, having that in the cognitive development that happens there is really significant. Anyway, I'll get off my dual language soapbox because this is huge to me, something hugely important that we don't pay a lot of attention to. All right, so former English learners, if they're having difficulty, could be because of a persistent language barrier, and so we need to address that. Usually in these cases, it involves retesting the language proficiency of a student who may be struggling because of a persistent language barrier. And if the results indicate that, well, they haven't achieved language proficiency like we thought, then we can put them back in L services. Do you all have a process for doing that here? Here.
I'm only using the microphone for our colleagues that are online. He asked if we have a procedure here. It's conducted on an individual basis. So if you have a student that may need to retake the assessment, then I would advise you to contact our accountability and assessment department for further instruction.
Thank you. All right. So when we're looking at this, if the Office for Civil Rights or the Department of Justice do any type of monitoring, they're looking at a number of things when it comes to monitoring or tracking when they're doing compliance monitoring. What they're looking for related to monitoring and exiting students is what they're looking at. These are the things when they come in, this is what they're looking for, that districts monitor or track the progress of their L students, including the opt-out Ls, in achieving language proficiency and content knowledge, acquiring that content knowledge. They're also looking at the state because they want to know whether the state's looking at what districts are doing, their programs, and whether they're enabling Ls to acquire that English and the content knowledge and being able to participate in the standard instructional program. So, and they also want to know if states have developed and ensure districts implement objective English language proficiency, the standards and define L status. If they just want to make sure that all of that is happening in the classroom, in the schools. All right. They're also looking to see if districts are monitoring the progress in that benchmark area of it for expected growth. States, and part of that is going to be your trajectories. States and districts, they want to know if you're exiting students from L programs and services prematurely or too late, and whether you're tracking or monitoring the progress of students for those 2 to 4 years. It's a little confusing because this Dear Colleague letter was actually published before ESSA was passed. And so there's a little bit of contradictory information because they still talk about 2 years in there of monitoring, and now it's 4 years of reporting. So there's a little bit of difference, but there is some information there. And they just want to ensure that we're not prematurely exiting, keeping them too long, overcoming academic deficits, things like that. All right. Compliance findings. So typically these are the types of compliance findings that that OCR has basically given if there was a compliance issue. Things that we've already talked about: exiting intermediate or advanced students before they're proficient. That's a compliance finding that they've given. Or exiting students based on insufficient numbers of teachers who are qualified to deliver a program. That's the first one. I said the second one first. Sorry about that. Failing to monitor the progress of former English learners. In other words, making sure that they're performing well academically, and failing to exit students from L programs after they could have been, exited and demonstrated proficiency in English. Okay, so these are the typical compliance findings that we've seen when it comes to monitoring exiting students. All right, so that's the end of this first section. Any questions? Yes. Okay. Yes. The question is, what do we do if we have students who need to participate virtually and they don't have a high proficiency level in English? And I can say a bunch of things, but I'm going to let Allie address this one.
Thank you. That is a very great question. And I think that's something that we can establish for English learners, given a lot of the questions that I heard this morning. So I would put a pin in that and we can revisit it at our last session. We have the entire day. So any questions that you have or anything, any topics that you would like to discuss for our last session in May, I believe it's May 14th or May 16th, whatever the Wednesday is, please share those questions with me and we can revisit and establish all of those protocols or any questions that you need answered at that time. But I'm happy to meet with you on a one-on-one basis to establish that before we get there.
Yes, if it's a burning question, you don't have to wait until May. All right. So yes, we have another question. So the question is, how do we handle the situation where a student may not be able to take or participate in all 4 domains on the proficiency assessment? On the slide, I did provide some information and an email address, but I'll let Allie say anything more that she would like to say.
Sure. Thank you for your question. The accountability department here does have a protocol for that. So if you would like, or in the future, because the time has passed, to request an exclusion from that domain, then you would have to complete that paperwork, and it is done by your district test coordinator. But there is a time frame that it has to be submitted prior to testing. So for the following year, or the next year or any future years, I would go through your district test coordinator, because they receive the updated forms directly from our accountability team. So she asked how or on what basis is it determined. It would have to be medically proven or some type of documentation to support it. So yes, IP. Or it 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 depends on the student, and we can speak about your particular district. No problem.
And the last topic for today is related to special education. Let me just finish, because when it comes to that type of thing, the guidance out there says it can be documented in an IEP or 504 plan. But how your district handles it might be a little bit differently because of local control and the way things are going. And so, but it is allowable, it is recommended that it be documented in an IEP or 504 plan. And your next question? Yes. So that question is about how is it possible to prematurely exit a child? What they're specifically referencing is a criteria that is established in ESSA and in civil rights related to attainment of English language proficiency. So if you have a student who has not reached a score of proficient on the ELPT and you exit them from L services, that's premature exit. Yeah. Any other questions on that? Did you want to say anything? Okay. All right. So we'll move on then if there's no other questions, so that we can get through this section, take a short break, and then we'll talk about English learners with disabilities after this, evaluating the effectiveness of your L programs. All right. Good questions. Thank you very much. I enjoy those questions. I especially enjoy it when Allie has to answer them. So, all right. Again, this section is pulling a lot of information from that Dear Colleague letter related to evaluating the effectiveness of L programs, and also looking at the English Learner Toolkit that's on the Office for English Language Acquisition at the U.S. Department of Education's website. All right. Okay, so what's the basis for evaluating L program success? And that Dear Colleague letter guidance talks about, when OCR and DOJ are making compliance determinations, what are they looking at? They're considering whether the program succeeds after a legitimate trial in producing results that indicate that language barriers are actually being overcome. So in other words, students' language abilities does not impede them from acquiring content knowledge. And so accommodations and a lot of other things are involved, especially with students with lower proficiency levels. But that's the main thing they're looking at. Can those students participate in the academic program that's being offered by your school districts? So to determine this, there's a lot of performance data that's looked at. And they're looking at data for your English learners and your former English learners, and in comparison to how your never English learners are performing, to see if your programs are what they say reasonably calculated to enable L students this wonderfully to attain parity of participation. In other words, are participate in the academic program just like anyone else. So that's a big piece and an important piece, that they are able to participate in the academic program. So overcoming language barriers means that students can participate in that, okay? So that overcoming language barriers is terminology that you need to be familiar with. And I'm going to talk more about some of this later when it comes to comparing, performing comparably. We already talked about that a little bit. And it's mentioned in a number of places, so I just kind of mention it there as well. And you don't have to be equal to their never L peers, they have to be comparable. So when it comes to evaluating our programs, the OLL toolkit is chapter 9 that deals with this topic, and they list a number of things that you should be evaluating when you're looking at how your L programs are performing. And they list 7 things, and I'm going to try to walk through all of these in the remaining slides in this section. But they talk about policies, procedures, programs, practices, resources, staffing, and student outcomes. All right. So let's look at policies. So something to think about, something to ask is, does your district have policies in place that limit the participation of English learners in educational programs? Okay. What do you have available? First one on the list there is grade level content, and I've talked about this before. And I'm a former state director, and I've had to, work with some school districts that had like few or were new to serving English learners, and they brought the students in and they, tested them on some reading program, and they were like, well, they should be in 4th grade, but their reading level is 1st grade, so we're going to put them in 1st grade. And that's an issue. They have to be able to participate in programs at their grade level. And that means being able to be provided grade level content. If it needs to be scaffolded or some way to provide types of accommodations so that they can learn this information, it still needs to be that grade level content. Do you have any policies about pre-kindergarten participation, like not allowing English learners not allowing students who aren't proficient in English to participate? Anything that's a barrier for English learners. When you look at advanced coursework, after school and extracurricular activities, do you have policies in place related to separate instruction for limited periods of time, and including the special education services, which we'll talk about more later. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. So the comment was that there are teachers who don't want to do certain things. And while that may be the case, what's required and what's necessary and what's probably most helpful is that they provide the services that the students need to acquire that content, of course, at the grade level, and not have anything in place at a district or school level that would impede English learners from participating or limit them from participating in educational programs. So when you're looking at your policies, you need to be thinking about, do these policies restrict English learners from educational opportunities that might be available to never English learners or non-English learners? So if you have policies in place that are impeding your English learners from participating in the standard academic program, then you may want to reconsider those policies. Yes, question. So the question is, does this include math? Because most of the time, math is a subject that maybe doesn't require as much in the terms of, language proficiency, but there is terminology and other things. There's the person asked the question has a couple of students who are struggling in math, and she believes it's because of the potential with not understanding the terminology. So I think this isn't a policy-related question necessarily. It's more like a practice-related question. When you're thinking about serving your English learners, if they are struggling in a subject area, then you need to determine why they're struggling and address that. So that's one of the requirements related to, providing services to English learners. If you have a policy in place that says we don't teach math terminology, well, then that's an issue. But if you believe it's a terminology issue, then working with the staff who provide that language acquisition to pre-teach terminology is a good practice to do to help those students if you believe that's the cause of the reason why they may not be performing as well. Is that helpful? Okay. Any other questions? Did you want to address that? Okay. All right. Procedures. So we talked about policies. Procedures, if you remember, was the second on that list. And previously, if you remember, I talked about the 5 procedures that the Office for Civil Rights says you must have in place to ensure that your programs could be successful. It's not a guarantee, but if you don't have these things in place, you're probably not going to be successful. And so there are other policies or procedures that are out there, but these are the procedures that are identified in OCR, and you have to have procedures that do all these different things: identify students, develop a program which has a reasonable chance for success, have to have the staff materials and facilities in place and used properly. That implementation is a big piece. You have to have standards, and you have to have exit criteria, and you have to assess or monitor or track the success of your program and modify it where needed. And that's a big piece, that modification if needed. So with the example we were just talking about, math, you have a couple students that aren't being successful. What can you do to modify what you're doing to help those students be successful? And that's an important piece of the procedures that you have in place. So there are other procedures. There's lots of stuff around students with disabilities when it comes to procedures, especially if they're English learners. So, we'll talk about some of that, but you have to look at the procedures you have. Are they causing situations where your English learners can't succeed in or access the academic program? Bless you. All right. Program implementation. Federal law requires that the program has a reasonable chance for success. So it doesn't, you can have experimental programs as long as those folks who are experts in the area believe it has a reasonable chance for success. But there are lots of programs. There are some that are even listed in your the L handbook. If you check out that. By the way, I will be giving a copy of these slides to the folks at LDOE, and there's some slides at the end that have links to a lot of different resources, including things on the LDOE website. So just so you know, that's coming. But a question to ask is it sufficient to meet legal requirements to overcome language barriers by just implementing an L program that has that's considered to have a reasonable chance for success? Yep. Hey, it's a good program. But if it's not being successful, no, it's not sufficient just to implement an L program if the program is not being successful, even if it has even if it's considered to have a reasonable chance for success. So if you're continuing to use a program, even if it has a sound educational design, that's not making, progress, it's not meeting those requirements, as implemented, it's ineffective. That's not allowable. You have to make adjustments to how you're implementing that program to make sure that your programs are being successful. All right. We talked a little bit about grade level content before. Chapter 9 of the L Toolkit talks about this as well. Research shows that effective programs eliminate achievement gaps by providing cohesive support, and that includes providing grade level content. So that's an important piece. The benefits of having access to grade level content, of course, we all know having that access helps them be successful in the classroom once they do attain proficiency and sets them up to be college and career ready. So we need to provide the supports and the information and at the grade level that is appropriate for the student. All right, unnecessary segregation. It doesn't say you can't pull students out at certain periods of time, but it does talk about not you're having without unnecessary segregation. So without the L program could be successful even with some, pull out where you teach specifics, especially when you have low proficiency students getting their language proficiency to the point where they can participate to a greater degree in the regular education classroom can be important. And so having those pull-out times for them could be important. But there are some subjects like physical education, art, music, that may not require as much language to participate. And getting students who are English learners in the classroom with, non-English learners is an important piece for that whole listening and speaking communication side of things as well with the students around them. So making sure that you're not pulling them out at times when it's not necessary is an important piece of the equation as well. So we want to avoid that issue as well. No questions on that? Okay. You do. Okay, so we're providing some hypothetical clarification. So the question is, if core instruction is more important and the only time available to pull a student out is during extracurricular, is that okay? And that's a very dependent, context-specific type question. It depends on, what's going on. If you have, and it depends on the proficiency level of the student as well. So I would say if those students, even with accommodations, would be unable to participate in core or extracurricular activities, then you need to address that issue, whether it's during core or extracurricular, and whether you try to use core content as part of the, program that you're doing with language proficiency. There are some programs that allow you to use that are more content-based English language proficiency instruction. So where you're using the content that's being taught in the classroom to help them achieve English proficiency. Those are types of things. Now, whether that's allowable or not, I really don't know if I want to try to get into answering that type of a question. I don't know if either of you want to talk about. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, it is a hypothetical. It's a tough situation, and it's, to me, very context specific. I got it, Allie. It is very context specific as to whether that would be recommended or not. Because there may be situations where the student's language proficiency is so low that doing content-based instruction during the core time would be more important than pulling them out of the extracurriculars, where there's less language requirements like art or music, so that they're in the classroom learning that productive language of listening and speaking while that content information is being focused on. So it is going to be a very context specific, and I can't tell you whether that works or not for it's more of an individual student on an individual student basis. Okay, 1 second. We have a response.
Oh, y'all.
Oh, the content base. Okay, so I'll let Ms. Jordan address the instructional minutes, but what I do want to circle us back to that we've been having this conversation over the past couple of sessions is that our push for every teacher and every student, regardless of your program, is that we're providing standards-based English instruction. So hence us having all of these sessions to inform us on instructional practices and support so that we can provide that professional development for all of our teachers. I know she will elaborate more on protecting our core instructional time and additional minutes, but I just want to remind everybody that that is our focus, is that the student would receive that language support in their content classes.
Yeah, this our passion, right? So, and I was sitting in the back really thinking about, we have a lot of answers about providing high quality instruction for these kids in those inclusive ways. And then when I think about the real challenge here, who asked this question? Oh, thank you. It's beautiful. Hypothetically, is it okay? So this is a scheduling challenge, right? So really, and we're working to provide, and we're releasing additional staffing and scheduling guidance. We have some, we're updating it. We're very intentional in this one to provide some specific supports for professionals supporting English learners. So this is great. Perfect timing, perfect question. And as you think about scheduling and staffing for next school year, these are the perfect challenges that you bring to your leadership teams right now and say, hey, this is the challenge that we're having around providing some of these services, when to provide extra intervention and extra support for my English learners during the school day, because really it's got to be so intentional in the schedule. You have to know, when do we provide, what is that scheduled time during the day to do this? Otherwise, we find ourselves having to figure out, what are they going to miss to get the content intervention and the support they need to close learning gaps. And so that would be one of the things I would think right now is really perfect to do, is to really rethink scheduling. Because what we know is we've got to have these staggered opportunities. Otherwise, I'm always pulling out of the arts or some of those things, right, that are also important, make school fun, motivate a lot of our kids. Um, and think about how we can make our schedules work for us. Those things are staggered. I don't always have. Are you speaking from an elementary vantage point, high school, middle school, all of it? Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Those required 30 minutes, 3 times. Yeah. 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 And so I think it's really about, the challenge is about solving the scheduling issue. So, which isn't an easy, like, here's the one answer, fix it all. But I do think if we work with our leadership teams, bring that challenge up and say, okay, how do we make our schedules work for our kids and make our schedules do what we need them to do, which it's hard, right? It's hard to change a schedule in the middle of the school year. So right now you're trying to make it work, figure it out. When am I pulling? Where am I supporting? Where am I providing the extra intervention? But for the upcoming year, I would have a real solid plan, and find some solutions for that. And a lot of that includes having some of those staggered intervention times for students, um, figuring out your specials, right? All of your arts, your musics, all of those things, when they happen, on what days, how can we stagger that? So I don't pull my student from art or music at the same time every week, both opportunities, right? They may miss some of the arts once a week or so, but so that that's not their consistent miss, right? Especially if it's something that they really enjoy. So I could talk about this for hours, but I'll hand it back over to you.
No, thank you very much. That's, I thought about scheduling when the question was first asked, but in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, when I look at requirements for English learners, you can't deny them English language proficiency services because of scheduling. But the other side of the coin works as well, because when you think about what's required in a core program, so you have the content areas that are core programs. But for English learners, that English language program is considered a core component of their education. So the scheduling piece, thank you so much for sharing that. That is true. That is a huge piece that you need to make sure that you're scheduling the appropriate time for not only the content, but also the language proficiency. All right, thanks. That was great. Thank you very much. All right, goals. We know ESSA requires long-term goals and intermediate measures of progress. This Dear Colleague letter guidance document talks about that goals have to include enabling English learners within a reasonable period of time to attain both English proficiency and acquire that content knowledge, that meaningful participation in the standard educational program. And it, again, it says comparable to never L peers, not equal or exactly as. So it's important to note that it is allowable to have some other goals. And you know, OCR and DLJ, they will not consider an L program to be successful, but they won't consider a L program successful unless they meet those two goals that are mentioned there: English proficiency, participation in standard educational programs. And again, as we've talked about, ineffective programs have to have adjustments made based on that. But when we're talking about what additional goals might there be, so that you can have them in a number of different areas. You can have them in academics, which when you look at your trajectories, the scores on your LEAP assessments are included there. So there is some academic looking into that. Language proficiency, other things, they're all allowable. So it is allowable to do that. But when it comes to having goals to exit students within a certain period of time, like our trajectories do, it's not allowable to exit students from English Learner Services based on a number of years if that student hasn't attained English proficiency. So if you say, you know, based on our trajectories, this student should exit L services in 4 years, and 5 years later they still haven't exited L services, that doesn't mean that you should exit them, because they should have already exited. If they haven't attained English proficiency, you can't exit students at that point in time. Exiting from L's denies them their civil rights core L program, which we just talked about. They have their
it's still like you can see it on here. It's picking up audio. Well, it takes
All right, welcome back, everyone. I think we were successful in getting the folks back online, connected to the audio. So welcome back. Sorry for what you all that are the audio. So welcome back. Sorry for what you all that are. Okay, we're going to test this because we're having some issues here in the room with the audio. Okay, we're going to test this because we're having some issues here in the room with the audio. So we're still on a delay. Sorry. Still on a delay. Sorry. It takes a minute. I'm speaking into the mic again.
I think we're gonna have, unfortunately, we're gonna have to, why we encourage people to come in person.
Right, and if we're able to resume after lunch.
If we're able to resume, we will, but we can't hold up.
Yeah.
But, hold on. Should we, is it live streaming now?
Yeah. So they'll be able to hear me
Okay,
say that.
go on and say it
And then wait.
while it's on live stream, and it'll probably repeat it, but then we'll cut it.
Okay.
And hopefully, it's not a Zoom.
Okay. So if you're in the room, but we're speaking specifically to our colleagues that are using the streaming platform, because there is some type of delay and repetition of everything that we're saying and then lag online. The streaming platform, there is some type of delay and repetition of everything that we're saying and lag online. We're going to suspend the Zoom right now. If we're able to resume after lunch, then we will do so. If not, all of the information will be shared via email to everyone that's registered. So we do apologize. If not, all of the information will be shared via email to everyone that's registered. So we do apologize.
So hold on. I'm going to end the stream, but I just want to make sure of something. If you're in here,